Wait, what if the wife who lost her memory was faking it the whole time? This guy, David, thought he got away with pushing his wife Lily off his boat. She washed up a month later with no memory in a little fishing village. David goes to check on her, and she's just drawing cracked walls in the sand, totally scared and empty. He pays the local fisherman to watch her. But here's the thing. Lily wasn't broken. She was putting on a show. Every time she drew that cracked wall, she was remembering what he did. And she was waiting. Just waiting for him to come back so she could set the perfect trap. David folded the white silk cloth and wiped it slowly around the neck of the whiskey bottle. The warm yellow lights of the yacht's cabin made the last brownish red smears shine like dark, wet ribbon. He held the bottle up, turning it. A thin, cold smile touched his lips. It was done. All neat and tidy. The waves rocked the boat in a gentle, sleepy rhythm, the perfect end to a perfect night. He placed the bottle on the polished wood shelf, right between his shiny sailing trophies. No trace left. No more Lily. Just the huge, dark sea, swallowing everything into silence. White light. Cold. So cold. A steady beep, beep, beep sound, sharp and annoying. Lily opened her eyes, but the world was just a blurry white fog with black dots. Her body felt heavy and numb, like she was buried under wet, cold sand. A sharp smell, like strong cleaner, hit her nose and made her want to throw up. She tried to move a finger. A jolt of pain, like electricity, shot from her temple down her spine. "She's awake," a distant voice said, echoing as if from the end of a long tunnel. A face leaned close, a woman in a white uniform, her mouth moving. But Lily heard nothing. In her head, there was only the roaring of the sea and a wall. A white brick wall, with a crack like a lightning bolt running from the top all the way down to the floor. The crack grew wider, and from inside it, thick, black darkness began to spill out. She breathed fast, her eyes wide open, staring at the plain hospital ceiling. Her memory was empty fog. What was her name? Why was she here? There was only the wall. Always the wall. "Do you remember anything?" the voice asked again, softer now. Lily turned her head slowly. Her eyes were clear and wild, like a trapped deer. She opened her mouth, but only a broken, scratchy sound came out. She closed her eyes, shivered, and curled into the safe silence inside herself. A month passed in the old fishing village, where the salty smell of the sea mixed with the smell of old fish in the damp air. Alan, the rough fisherman with hands cracked and hard from nets and salt water, had brought her to his small wooden house after finding her wandering the shore, clothes soaked, eyes empty. He called her Wave, because he found her where the waves met the sand, and because her mind seemed to rise and fall, lost, just like the tide. Her room, Wave's room, had just a narrow bed and a window looking out on the boat docks. She sat for hours on the sandy patch behind the house, a dry twig in her hand. Her fingers shook lightly, and without thinking, she drew. Lines appeared in the damp sand. Straight up and down lines, side to side lines. A wall. Then, from the top, a zigzag, angry line tearing right down through it. She would stare at the drawing, her face blank, then sweep her hand across to erase it, and start again. Wall, crack, erase, wall, crack, over and over, like a haunted ritual, while her eyes looked far away toward the horizon, where the pure white mansions of White Cliff sparkled in the sun. Alan watched from the kitchen door, his eyes full of pity. He didn't ask questions. He just brought her a bowl of hot fish porridge, set it gently beside her, and quietly walked away. David leaned back in the leather armchair in his big, quiet study, a glass of dark red wine in his hand. Life had returned to its rich, powerful, peaceful track. The morning newspaper lay on the glass coffee table. His eyes skimmed the headlines about politics and money, then stopped at a small corner in the local town section. A small headline: Unknown amnesiac woman found on eastern shore. Below it was a blurry black and white picture taken from far away. A thin young woman wearing a big baggy sweater, probably borrowed, sitting with her back turned, looking out to sea. Her long hair was wet, stuck to her neck. Her face was just a pale, unclear smudge. But the shape of her, the way she sat, all curled in, her head tilted slightly. A sudden chill ran down David's spine. His fingers clenched the wine glass so hard they turned white. A drop of red wine, like blood, fell onto the newspaper, spreading right over the blurry face in the photo. His heart pounded. Thump, 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 against his ribs, loud and wild. The sound of the waves, the smell of dried blood on the whiskey bottle, and that frail figure. It all crashed into him at once, making him dizzy. "It can't be," he whispered out loud, his voice rough and full of panic. The newspaper slipped from his fingers and fell to the shiny floor, but David's eyes stayed locked on the small, terrible picture, horror spreading through him like ice water. David's silver car looked like a spaceship that had landed in the wrong place. It crawled down the narrow, bumpy lane of the fishing village, past small wooden houses with peeling paint and lines of drying laundry. Children stopped playing to stare. Men mending nets on their doorsteps glanced up, their faces unreadable. The car stopped in front of Alan's house, its engine going quiet. The air here smelled of salt, fish, and damp earth. David stepped out. He wore simple, expensive clothes, a soft sweater and dark trousers, but they still seemed to glow against the faded backdrop. He took a deep breath, trying to look worried and relieved at the same time. He had practiced in the mirror. My lost wife, my poor, lost Lily. He walked to the door. Before he could knock, it opened. Alan stood there, filling the doorway. He was a big man, with broad shoulders and those rough, sun-weathered hands. He didn't say anything, just looked at David with calm, watchful eyes, like he was studying the surface of the water before casting a net. "I'm looking for my wife," David said, letting his voice hook just a little. "Lily. I saw the news. I think she might be here." Alan nodded slowly and stepped aside. The main room was small and clean, and there, sitting on a low stool by the empty fireplace, was Lily. She was wearing a borrowed flannel shirt that was too big for her. She was drawing in a patch of fine sand Alan had spread on the floor in a wooden tray. With one finger, she carefully traced lines, up and down, side to side. A wall. Then her finger jerked, making a sharp, jagged crack down the middle. She didn't look up. David's heart, which had been a tight fist in his chest, unclenched. A quiet, deep relief washed through him, so strong it made his knees feel weak for a second. She wasn't the sharp, clever Lily he knew. She was empty. A blank page. A child playing in the sand. "Lily?" he said, his voice soft and full of fake feeling. She froze. Her finger stopped in the sand. Very slowly, she lifted her head. Her eyes met his. They were the same clear blue, but now they were like windows to an empty room. There was no recognition, no love, no hate, just nothing. Then, a flicker, something deeper behind the emptiness. A tiny tremble started in her hands. "Sweetheart, it's me, David." He took a step forward, opening his arms like he wanted to hug her. "I've been so worried. I've been looking everywhere for you." Lily's breath hitched. The blankness in her eyes shattered into pure animal fear. She scrambled backward so fast the stool tipped over with a clatter. She didn't run to David. She spun around and stumbled towards Alan, hiding behind him, her small hands clutching the back of his worn work shirt. She peeked out, her wide eyes fixed on David, full of a terror she couldn't explain. David's arms dropped to his sides. His kind, loving husband act cracked for a second, and annoyance flashed in his eyes. He covered it quickly, turning it into pained confusion. She doesn't remember me," he said to Alan, his voice thick with a sadness that wasn't real. Alan had watched it all without moving. He had felt Lily's small hands grabbing his shirt, felt her trembling through the fabric. He looked from her terrified face to David's performance. He saw the perfect cut of David's clothes, the clean smoothness of his hands, the way his pain seemed to sit on his face like a mask, not coming from deep inside. A fisherman knows when something isn't what it seems. He knows fake bait. "She remembers nothing," Alan said, his voice a low rumble. "She only draws that." He nodded at the sand tray, at the endless, cracked wall. David walked over and looked down at the drawing. A cold finger of fear touched his spine again, but he pushed it down. It was just a scribble, the scribble of a broken mind. "The doctors said her memory might never come back," he said, sighing heavily. He turned to Alan, putting on his most reasonable, troubled face. "This is difficult. She's clearly terrified of me, of her own home, probably." He paced a little, running a hand through his perfect hair. "If I force her to come with me now, in this state, it could hurt her more. The newspapers, the people talking, it would be a scandal. For her, for me." He stopped and looked straight at Alan. "You've been kind to her. She trusts you." Alan just waited, his expression still calm and watchful. "I have a proposal," David said, his tone becoming smooth, like a business deal. "Let her stay here with you for her recovery. A quiet, simple place, away from everything that might scare her, Dar. I will, of course, cover all the costs. Her food, her clothes, anything she needs. And for your trouble, for your care." He paused, letting the offer hang in the air. "I will pay you." Well, he saw the change in Alan's eyes. Not greed, but a sharp, practical need. David's eyes had taken in the mended nets, The old but clean furniture, the general feeling of having just enough, and no more. This man was poor. Alan looked down at Lily, who was still hiding behind him, her face pressed against his back. He thought about his boat engine, which coughed and died last week. He thought about the coming winter and the leak in his roof. He thought about the silent, frightened woman who drew walls in the sand, who flinched at loud noises, who seemed to find a little peace only in this simple house. David's offer was a lifeline thrown for all the wrong reasons, but it was a lifeline. Alan's gaze met David's again. "How long?" he asked. "As long as she needs," David said, smiling a gentle, grateful smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I just want her to be safe and to heal. I'll visit, of course. To check on her progress. To watch," he thought. To make sure the past stays buried in the sand. Alan was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he gave a single, firm nod. "She can stay." "Thank you," David said, the picture of a relieved husband. Inside, he was already planning. He pulled out a sleek leather wallet and took out a thick stack of bills, placing it on the small wooden table. "For now, I'll bring more." He glanced one last time at Lily. She was watching him from behind Alan, her eyes like those of a scared seagull caught in a net. Empty, but alive. A problem that was now contained and under watch. David turned and walked back to his silver spaceship of a car. As he drove away, leaving the smell of fish and poverty behind, he felt back in control. The wave of panic from seeing the newspaper was gone. Lily was just a ghost in a fisherman's house, and he had just hired the fisherman to be her warden. Life in the little house by the docks began to find a rhythm, slow and steady like the tide. The sharp, scared look in Lily's eyes, in Wave's eyes, started to soften. She didn't talk much, but she began to do things. It was like her hands remembered what her mind did not. Alan lived simply, which was a nice way of saying he lived in a bit of a mess. His small kitchen was a collection of mismatched bowls, a single pot with a burnt bottom, and a counter that always seemed to have a fine layer of fish scales or breadcrumbs. His mending net took up half the main room, and his boots tracked sand onto the clean floorboards. Lily watched this for a few days, her head tilted like a curious bird. Then, one morning, she simply started. While Alan was out checking his boat, she took the broom. She didn't just sweep. She swept in slow, careful strokes, getting into every corner, pushing the sand and dust into a neat pile. She found a rag and a bucket of water and wiped the counter until the old wood showed its grain. She stacked the bowls properly. She folded the blanket on Alan's chair. When Alan came back, he stopped in the doorway, blinking. The room smelled of clean water and soap. He looked at Lily, who was standing by the now clean counter, her hands clasped in front of her. She didn't smile, but her face was calm. "It's better," she said, her voice quiet but clear. It was the first full sentence she had spoken. That evening, she pointed at the pot he was using to heat some canned soup. "It's burnt," she said. "It still works," Alan grunted. She looked at the soup, then at the few potatoes and onions in a basket. Without a word, she took the pot from him, washed the burnt part, and started cutting the vegetables into small, even pieces. Her hands moved with a quick, sure grace. She didn't follow a recipe. She just seemed to know. She fried the onions until they were golden, added the potatoes and some water, and let it all simmer. The smell that filled the little house was warm and good, a smell of a real home, not just a place to sleep and eat. Alan ate 2 big bowls in silence. "Good," he finally said, not looking at her. That became their pattern. Alan would leave a trail, dirty clothes, tools on the table, a spilled bag of rice. And Lily, quietly and without fuss, would tidy it. She would pick up his wet socks from the floor and hang them by the stove. She would put the tools back on their shelf. She would point at the rice scattered on the floor and say, "Wasteful." It wasn't nagging. It was a simple statement of fact, like saying the sky was blue. Alan, who had lived alone for so long, found he didn't mind. He'd grunt, but he'd also try to remember to take his boots off at the door. The house felt different, lived in a gentle way. He even fixed the leak in her bedroom window without her asking. One night, a few weeks later, a storm blew in from the sea. The wind howled around the corners of the little wooden house, making the old timbers creak and groan. Rain hammered on the roof like 1,000 tiny fists. Alan was already asleep in his room, tired from a long day on the water. Lily lay in her narrow bed, listening. The sounds of the storm were loud, but they were outside sounds. They belonged. Then she heard something else. Tap, tap, tap. It was faint, almost buried under the noise of the wind, a dry, hollow sound. Tap, tap. It wasn't coming from the roof or the window. It was coming from inside the wall beside her bed. The sound was patient, repetitive, like someone knocking softly, wanting to be let in or trying to get out. Lily sat up straight in the dark, her heart suddenly beating fast and hard in her chest. She wasn't scared of the storm, but this sound, it crawled under her skin. It was wrong. She stared at the dark shape of the wall, her ears straining. Tap, tap, and tap. A memory, not an image, but a feeling, brushed against her mind. A feeling of being trapped, of darkness pressing in. A desperate, silent scream. She threw off her blanket and padded quickly across the cold floor to Alan's room. She didn't knock. She pushed his door open. The room was dark, but she could see the shape of him in his bed. "Alan," she whispered, her voice tight with an urgency he had never heard before. He woke up instantly, a fisherman's light sleep broken. "Wave, what is it?" He sat up. "There's someone," she said, pointing back towards her room. Her eyes were huge and dark in the shadows. "In the wall. They're knocking. They need help." For a moment, Alan just stared at her. A chill that had nothing to do with the storm went down his back. He got up, pulled on his trousers, and lit an old oil lamp. The warm light made their shadows dance on the walls. "Show me," he said. He followed her back to her room. She stood by her bed, hugging herself, and pointed a shaking finger at the plain wooden wall. "There. Listen." Alan held his breath. He listened hard. All he could hear was the whoosh of the wind, the rattle of rain on the window, the creak of the old house settling. No tapping, no knocking. "I don't hear anything, Wave," he said softly. "It's just the storm. The house is old. It makes noises." "No," she insisted, her voice trembling. It was knocking. A person. Trapped. She looked at him, and her expression was no longer just scared. It was certain. Haunted. To calm her, Alan took his hammer and tapped gently up and down the wall. He pressed his ear against the cool wood. The wall was solid. Behind it was just the outside siding and then the wild, stormy night. There were no hollow spaces, no room for anyone to be trapped. "See?" he said, trying to sound reassuring. "It's solid, just wood and nails. No one is there." Lily looked from the wall to his face. She didn't look convinced. She looked confused, and then, slowly, a deep, frightened sadness filled her eyes. She nodded slowly and got back into bed, pulling the blanket up to her chin, her back to the wall. Alan blew out the lamp and went back to his room, but he couldn't sleep. He lay in the dark, listening to the storm and thinking. He thought about the way she kept drawing that cracked wall in the sand, over and over. He thought about the sure, knowing way her hands moved in the kitchen, like a different person lived inside her. And now this. A knocking in a solid wall. A person trapped. A cold, creeping feeling settled in his stomach. He had thought she was getting better, becoming more present. But what if the opposite was true? What if the things locked away inside her mind, the memories, the trauma of whatever had happened to her, were not gone, but were starting to knock on the walls of her sanity, trying to get out? And what if what was trying to get out was something terrifying? The thought made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He wasn't just housing a lost woman anymore. He was living with a mystery. And the mystery was beginning to whisper in the dark. The little television in the corner of Alan's living room was old, with a picture that flickered sometimes. He turned it on one evening for the news, mostly for the background noise while he mended a net. Lily was sitting on the floor nearby, sorting dried beans into a bowl, her movements calm and methodical. A serious-faced news anchor appeared, and in local business news, the long-running Thorne estate case has finally been settled. With the official declaration of presumed death for reclusive heiress Alara Thorne, who vanished over a year ago, the vast estate, including the famed White Cliff properties, passes entirely to her husband, David Thorne. A photograph filled the screen. It was David, but not the David who had come to the village in simple clothes. This David was in a sharp, dark suit, standing in front of a huge, modern building, smiling a small, polite smile for the cameras. He looked powerful, untouchable. Alan's hands stilled on the net. He glanced at Lily. She had frozen, a handful of beans forgotten in her palm. She stared at the screen, her eyes wide and unblinking. Her breathing became shallow. Alan pointed a thick finger at the television. "Wave. That man. The one who came here. He said he was your husband." The words seemed to punch through the quiet fog in Lily's mind. Husband. David. White Cliff. The names didn't bring a face, but they brought a feeling. A cold, heavy feeling, like a stone dropping into her stomach. Then another word floated up, connected to the image of the huge building and David's smiling face. A word from a life she couldn't remember. The inheritance, she whispered, the foreign word feeling strange on her tongue. A flash, not a memory but an impression, of cold eyes across a wide, polished table. Of papers. Of feeling very, very small. The stone in her stomach turned to ice, and the ice cracked, releasing a wave of pure, mindless terror. The bowl of beans clattered to the floor, scattering everywhere. A sharp, gasping scream tore from Lily's throat. She scrambled backward, pressing herself against the wall as if trying to push right through it to escape the image on the screen. No, 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 she cried, her hands flying up to cover her ears, her eyes squeezed shut. Wave. Hey, it's okay. Alan was beside her in an instant. He didn't try to pull her hands down. Instead, he put his big, solid arms around her, pulling her gently away from the wall and against his chest. She fought for a second, trembling violently, her screams muffled against his shirt. Shh, you're safe. You're here. He's not here. Look, he's gone. He reached over and snapped the television off, plunging the room into a sudden, heavy silence broken only by Lily's ragged sobs. He held her, rocking slightly, until the violent shaking subsided into hiccuping breaths. It's just a picture, he murmured. Just a picture on a bad box. A few days later, the trouble Alan had been dreading arrived. He was outside scrubbing his fishing cooler when 3 men walked up the path. They weren't from the village. They wore cheap leather jackets and had hard eyes. The leader, a man with a thin scar by his mouth, leaned against the doorframe. Alan, the money for your boat engine. It's late. Alan wiped his hands on his trousers. I told you. The season's been bad. I need more time. Time's up, Scarmouth said. His eyes scanned the poor interior of the house, landing on the old television. We'll take that for interest. Alan's body went tense. That television was worthless to them, but it was the one thing in the house that wasn't strictly for survival. It was a small piece of normalcy. Taking it was an insult, a way of pushing him into the dirt. A hot, reckless anger surged in his chest. You're not taking anything from my house, he growled. He stepped inside, his movement causing the men to step back into the main room. On the small table by the door was an empty glass bottle, once holding cheap wine. Without thinking, Alan grabbed it by the neck. The glass felt cool and solid in his hand. A weapon. He held it up, his face dark with defiance. Get out! Lily had been in the kitchen doorway, watching silently, her face pale. When she saw Alan grab the bottle, something exploded in her head. It wasn't a memory. It was a lightning bolt of pure sensation. The cool smoothness of glass. Not a wine bottle, but heavier with sharp edges. The amber color of whiskey catching the light. A hand. A smooth, manicured hand wrapping around the neck, not in anger, but with a terrible, calm purpose. Then a sharp, sickening crack, not of glass breaking, but of something else. The smell of salt air mixing with something metallic and sweet. The world telescoped. The man in front of her was no longer Alan. He was a silhouette against bright cabin lights. The bottle in his hand was no longer a threat. It was the end of something. It was death, a jolt of electric terror, 1,000 times worse than what she felt at the TV, sizzled through every nerve. Her breath stopped. Then a scream, raw and deafening, ripped from her lungs. Murder. He's going to murder someone. Help me, please. Help me. She wasn't looking. looking at the loan sharks. She was staring right at Alan, her eyes wide with absolute, unrecognizing horror. She stumbled backward, tripping over a chair, and scrambled towards the open front door, still screaming. "He killed her! He has a bottle! Help!" The effect was instant and chaotic. Alan froze, the bottle half lowered, his anger replaced by stunned confusion. The three loan sharks looked from the screaming, hysterical woman to the bewildered fisherman. This wasn't a simple debt collection anymore. This was a potential crime scene, with a witness screaming bloody murder. Neighbors would be coming. Police might come. Scarmouth's face lost its tough look, replaced by panic. "Forget it! This is too hot!" he barked at his men. They didn't need telling twice. They turned and almost ran down the path, disappearing around the corner. Alan dropped the bottle on the table with a thud. His heart was hammering. "Wave! Lily, stop! It's me!" But she was crouched by the door, curled into a ball, her arms over her head, sobbing uncontrollably, lost in a terror he couldn't see. The words tumbled out between gasps. "The glass! The blood! On the wall!" He smiled. Slowly, carefully, Alan approached her as one would a terrified animal. He knelt in front of her, not touching her. "Wave," he said, his voice low and steady, forcing calm into it. "Look at me. It's Alan. It's just Alan. The bad men are gone. You scared them away. You did that." Her sobs hitched. One terrified eye peeked out from under her arm. It saw his worn face, his worried eyes, his empty hands. "See, no bottle, it's over." Slowly, trembling so hard her teeth chattered, she uncurled a little. He didn't grab her, he just opened his arms. After a long moment, she fell into them, her body still shaking with aftershocks of the panic. He held her tightly, sitting back on the floor of the quiet, empty house. "You're safe," he whispered into her hair, over and over. But a chilling certainty was settling in his own heart. She hadn't been scared of the loan sharks. She had been scared of him, or rather of the man she saw when he picked up that bottle. The memory that had burst out of her wasn't just a name or a place. It was a weapon and a scream. The silence in Alan's house after the loan sharks left felt heavy and strange. Lily was quiet now, but her eyes were like those of a rabbit that had just escaped a trap. Wide, watchful, jumping at every sound. She wouldn't go near the table where the bottle had been. Alan knew he couldn't handle this alone anymore. The things in her head were no longer just sad drawings. They were monsters that made her scream about murder. He found the crisp business card David had left, tucked behind a cup on the shelf. He used his old, clunky mobile phone and dialed the number. In his study at White Cliff, David's phone buzzed softly on the polished desk. He saw the unfamiliar number and almost didn't answer. But something made him pick up. "David Thorne. It's Alan, the fisherman." Alan's voice was tense, low. "It's about Wave. About Lily." David's body went very still. "What about her?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "She's remembering things. Or something's breaking through. She saw you on the news and she screamed. Then today there was trouble here and I picked up a bottle. Just to scare some men off." Alan's words tumbled it out, confused. "But when she saw the bottle in my hand, she lost her mind. She started screaming murder. She yelled about the glass and blood on the wall, and she keeps drawing walls, man. Cracked walls, over and over in the sand. It's like it's all connected in her head, and it's coming out all wrong and terrified. On the other end of the line, David didn't make a sound, but inside, a cold, sharp panic exploded. The glass, the wall. She wasn't just babbling. She was piecing together the shattered pieces of that night. The whiskey bottle, the blood splatter on the white wall of the yacht's cabin. It was vague, confused, but it was there. The fog in her mind was lifting, and soon she would see him clearly in it. His hand gripping the phone was white-knuckled, but his voice, when it came, was smooth with concern. "That sounds serious, Alan. Very serious. She's having violent hallucinations. She could be a danger to herself, or to you. This isn't a safe environment for her anymore." "I don't think she'd hurt anyone," Alan said, defensive. "She's just scared." "Scared people do unpredictable things," David said, his mind racing, a new, final plan clicking into place. The fisherman had outlived his usefulness. Lily was becoming a liability that couldn't be contained in a little village. "Look, I'll handle it. I'll send a car, a private ambulance with people who know how to handle delicate mental cases. They'll bring her to a special facility where she can get real help. Tonight, it's for the best." Alan hesitated. It felt too fast. But the memory of Lily's terrified screams, of her looking at him as if he were a monster, made him doubt himself. Maybe the rich man was right. Maybe she needed doctors he couldn't afford. "Tonight?" he repeated. "Yes, be ready." David hung up without another word. He immediately dialed a different number, his instructions short, cold, and very clear. A plain black van with tinted windows arrived just after dark. 2 men got out. They weren't dressed like medical workers. They wore dark jackets and moved with a quick, efficient roughness. Alan stood in the doorway, a knot of unease in his stomach. "We're here for the patient," the taller one said, his voice flat. Lily, who had been watching from behind Alan, felt the fear surge back. These men didn't smell like medicine or kindness. Their eyes scanned the house like they were assessing it for a fight. When the tall man reached for her arm, she jerked back. "No, Alan," she cried, clinging to his shirt. "It's okay, Wave. They're going to take you somewhere to help you," Alan said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was being paid to let this happen. It wasn't gentle. The 2 men moved in, prying her hands from Alan. She kicked and fought, her panic giving her a wild strength. In the struggle, as they were bundling her toward the van, her mind, sharpened by terror, started grabbing details. It was a way to hold on to something real. The van's license plate. It was dirty, but she saw the letters and numbers. CL1 something, 8J. She scratched at the face of the man holding her, her nails catching on a rough patch of skin. A raised, pink scar, like a burn on the back of his right hand. The other man had a tattoo on his neck, just above his collar, a dark, messy shape that looked like a twisted anchor. They shoved her into the back of the van. The door slid shut with a heavy, final thump, plunging her into near darkness. The engine started, and the van began to move. She huddled on the cold metal floor, sobbing, her mind clinging to those details like lifelines. CL1, 8J, scar hand, anchor neck. The drive felt long. The van moved from the bumpy lanes of the fishing village onto smoother, faster roads. It went up a long, winding hill. Finally, it slowed, turned, and crunched onto a gravel driveway before stopping. The doors opened. The two men pulled her out. The air here was different. Crisp, clean, smelling of cut grass and expensive flowers, not salt and fish. She stumbled, and they half-dragged her forward. They were in front of a huge, modern house. It was all sharp angles and vast windows, glowing with soft, warm light. It was beautiful and cold. At the top of the wide stone steps, the tall front door opened, spilling more light onto the driveway. A silhouette appeared in the doorway. A man standing perfectly still, watching them drag her toward him. Lily looked up, her tears blurring her vision. She saw the sleek lines of the mansion, the manicured hedges, the sheer, intimidating wall of glass and steel. It was the place from the television, the place attached to the cold, heavy feeling and the word inheritance. They hadn't taken her to a hospital. They had brought her to White Cliff. The room in the basement was cold, made of smooth, gray concrete. A single, bare light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows. The air smelled of damp and dust. In the middle of one wall, there was a section that looked newer than the rest. The concrete a slightly different shade. It was about the size of a doorway. David pushed Lily into the room. She stumbled but caught herself, her back against the cold wall. The two rough men had left. It was just the two of them now. David closed the heavy metal door with a quiet, final click. He turned to look at her. He wasn't pretending to be the worried husband anymore. His face was calm, curious, and very cold. "We have unfinished business, Lily," he said. His voice was flat, echoing in the empty space. She huddled against the wall, her shoulders shaking, the picture of pure, broken terror. "You know, Alara didn't have to die that night," he mused, walking a slow circle around her. "Not so soon anyway. The plan was to wait. But you had to flirt. You had to make her jealous. You couldn't just be patient." Lily flinched, a small, wounded sound escaping her lips. "She caught us. On the yacht. Made a scene. So messy." David sighed, as if remembering a minor inconvenience. "I had to improvise. One good swing with that nice, heavy whiskey bottle, right to the temple. She just went quiet. So much easier than I expected." He looked at Lily, a cruel glint in his eye. "I did the same to you. One swing. You should have died just like her. So why didn't you? Why did you have to float back up and ruin everything?" He pointed at the newer section of the concrete wall. "But that's where it ends. Today, you go in there. You can keep Alara company. I've been waiting to put you both together. A tidy ending." He expected her to scream, to beg, to finally break. Instead, the shaking stopped. Lily wiped a tear from her cheek with a slow, deliberate swipe of her thumb. She straightened up, her back no longer slouched against the wall. The wide, frightened look in her eyes drained away, replaced by a cool, clear focus. The innocent, lost wave vanished like mist. "You really thought I lost my mind, didn't you, darling?" Her voice was different. It was steady, sharp, and held no fear. It was the voice of someone who had been in control all along. David's confident smirk faltered. "What game are you playing now?" "No game," Lily said, her eyes locked on his. "A performance. I didn't lose my memory. I was buying time. Time to watch you, to make sure you felt safe and smug. Time to get my revenge." A flicker of doubt, then hot anger, flashed across David's face. "You're insane. The head injury made a convenient story," she finished for him. "The police are on their way here right now. Your little kidnapping? Alan filmed the whole thing from his window. The van, your men, you standing right there in your fancy doorway. He sent it to the police an hour ago." David's jaw tightened. "Alan, that simpleton, I paid him." "And I told him the truth," Lily said calmly. "I told him everything you did to me, to Alara. That panicked phone call he made to you, where he told you I was remembering, that was my idea. I knew you'd get scared. I knew you'd come for me yourself if you thought the past was crawling out. I led you right into this basement." David's face flushed dark red. The polished, controlled man was cracking. "You clever little—" "But video of a kidnapping is just kidnapping," Lily cut in, her voice icy. "A murder confession is better." She tapped a finger on her plain plastic watch. Then she unbuttoned the tuck button of her shirt, revealing a tiny, almost invisible black lens pinned to her collar. "Everything you just said, about killing Alara, about the bottle, about this wall, is recorded, both sound and video. Alan has a friend who fixes old electronics. We made some modifications. For one long second, there was only the hum of the light bulb." David stared at the tiny lens, then at her watch. The horror of his own words, his proud, detailed confession, sank in, turning his blood to ice. A raw, animal roar of rage tore from his throat. His perfect plan, his wealth, his freedom, all destroyed by the woman he'd thought was a helpless victim. He lunged, hands clawing for her, his face a mask of pure murder. Lily didn't back away. She'd been waiting for this. As he rushed forward, she raised her wrist. Her thumb found a small, hidden button on the side of her watch and pressed it. Psht! A thin, precise jet of liquid shot from the watch face, hitting David directly in the eyes. He screamed, a high, strangled sound of shock and pain. He staggered back, hands flying to his face. The pepper spray burned like acid, blinding him instantly. He stumbled, crashing to his knees on the concrete, coughing and gagging. Lily moved with swift, practiced efficiency. She had planned for every step. She reached down, pulled up her pants leg, and slid a small backup canister of pepper spray from a holder on her ankle. She didn't need it. She tossed it aside. Then her hand went to her belt, under her loose shirt. She pulled out a device that looked like a small black remote with two metal prongs at the end. David was writhing on the floor, blinded and in agony. But he was still thrashing, still dangerous. Lily stepped in close, avoiding his wild swings. She pressed the prongs of the stun gun against the side of his neck. Zed! A sharp, crackling buzz filled the room. David's body jerked violently, then slumped, a weak groan escaping his lips. She didn't hesitate. She knelt beside his twitching form, her fingers quickly patting his pockets. She found his slim, expensive smartphone and slipped it into her own pocket. Then she turned and ran to the heavy metal door. She yanked it open, slipped out into the basement hallway, and with all her strength pulled the door shut behind her. Her fingers found the thick, old-fashioned metal bolt on the outside. She slammed it home. Thunk! Ugh! The sound was final. From inside the concrete room, a moment of silence was followed by a furious, pounding thunder on the metal door. Then a scream, not of pain, but of utter, defeated rage. Lily stood in the cool, dark hallway, David's phone cold in one hand, the stun gun warm in the other. She took a deep, steadying breath, not of fear, but of a long-held tension finally released. Then she turned and walked quickly up the stairs, following the growing sound of sirens that now pierced the silent walls of White Cliff. The sirens were close, but not close enough. As Lily reached the top of the basement stairs, she could see flashes of blue and red light pulsing against the tall windows of the grand entrance hall. But between her and those windows, a large shadow moved. One of David's men, the one with the twisted anchor tattoo on his neck, was standing guard just inside the front door, peering out at the police cars. Lily ducked back into the hallway, her heart pounding. She couldn't go out the front. She was trapped inside the beast's lair. But she knew this lair. Before the Amnesia Act, before Wave, she had spent months in this house, studying its owner and his world. The memories, clear and sharp now, came back in useful flashes. Servants' hallway, kitchen pantry, laundry chute. She slipped through a discreet door hidden in the wood paneling, entering a narrower, plainer corridor used by staff. Her soft shoes made no sound on the tile. She passed a large kitchen, empty and dark, and ducked into a bathroom just off the laundry room. It was small, windowless, and most importantly, it had a lock on the door. She turned the lock with a quiet click and leaned against the door, breathing hard. She fumbled David's phone from her pocket. The screen lit up, demanding a passcode or a face scan. It was useless to her. But it could still make a call. Even a locked phone can call emergency services. With trembling but determined fingers, she pressed the side button. "Emergency OS," she whispered to the voice assistant. A countdown began on the screen. She held her breath. 3, 2, 1. The call connected. A dispatcher's calm voice came through. 911, what is your emergency? My name is Lily. I'm at the White Cliff Mansion, the David Thorne residence. I've been kidnapped. The man who killed Alara Thorne has me locked inside. He's in the basement. Please, hurry. He's coming for me. She kept her voice low and urgent. I'm sending units now. Can you stay on the line? I can't. He'll hear. She ended the call, her hands shaking. It was done. Another thread in the net. Thud, thud, thud. The sound was distant but heavy, vibrating through the floor. It was coming from below. David. He was awake, and he was pounding on the bolted basement door. Then, a muffled shout. He was calling for his men. Panic tried to rise in her throat, but she swallowed it down. Think. He'll check the main rooms first. He'll think I'm trying to get to the police. She had to move. Staying in one place was a death sentence. She unlocked the bathroom door and peeked out. The servants' hall was still clear. She ran back the way she came, towards the main part of the house. It was the last place he'd expect her to go. As she slipped into the vast, shadowy living room, she heard voices. David's voice, raw with rage and pain, and the gruff replies of his men. They were upstairs, searching the bedrooms. Find her. She can't have gotten far. Check every closet. Lily moved like a ghost across the expensive rug, her eyes on the far side of the room. There was a study with a door that led out to a patio. Maybe she could circle around. "Boss, the basement door's bolted from the outside. She locked you in." It was Scarhand's voice, loud from the top of the main staircase. A moment of furious silence. Then David's voice, colder and more dangerous than she'd ever heard it. "She's still in the house. Fan out. She's mine." Footsteps thundered on the stairs. They were coming down. Lily's escape route was cut off. She ducked behind a large sofa, pressing herself into the shadows. She could hear them spreading out, opening doors, overturning furniture in other rooms. They were getting closer. Then a different sound cut through the chaos, the shattering of glass, the front door, shouts from outside. "Police! Open up!" The police were trying to get in, but the front door was heavy, reinforced. The commotion outside distracted David's men for a crucial second. Lily saw her chance. She sprinted from behind the sofa, not towards an exit, but deeper into the heart of the house, back towards the basement stairs. It was the one place they might not look again. She was halfway across the main hallway when a hand grabbed her arm, yanking her back so hard she almost fell. It was David. His eyes were red and swollen from the pepper spray, his hair disheveled, his fine clothes rumpled. Pure, venomous hatred twisted his face. "You think you're so clever," he spat, his grip like iron. He began dragging her, not towards an exit, but back down the hallway toward the basement door. "You wanted to see my work? You wanted proof? Let's give the police a show." He shoved her through the open basement door and down the first few steps. He was stronger, fueled by rage and desperation. He forced her down the stairs and back into the cold concrete room with the single light bulb. He pushed her hard, and she fell against the newer section of the wall he had pointed to. "Meet Alara," he roared, his voice echoing in the small space. He raised his fist, aiming for her head, just like he had with the bottle. This was it. The moment he would be caught. But before his fist could connect, the world exploded with noise and light. The basement door at the top of the stairs burst open with a deafening crash. "Police! Freeze! Get down on the ground!" Bright flashlight beams cut through the gloom, pinning David in their glare. Officers poured down the stairs, weapons drawn. David froze, his fist still in the air, his body silhouetted against the concrete wall. Lily was crumpled at its base, the picture of a victim about to be struck. In that frozen second, everything was clear. The locked basement, the fleeing woman, the enraged man standing over her in front of a suspicious, freshly patched wall. "Don't move," an officer commanded, rushing forward. David's shoulders slumped. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a dawning, terrible understanding. He looked from the guns to Lily, who slowly looked up at him from the floor. There was no fear in her eyes now, only a calm, exhausted certainty. The police swarmed him, pulling his arms behind his back, clicking on handcuffs. As they led him away, he kept staring at the wall, then at Lily, his expression one of stunned defeat. Anya, older detective, helped Lily to her feet. "Are you Lily, Alan's friend?" She nodded, her legs weak with relief. "He's outside. He gave us the video, the license plate, The descriptions of the men. He said you'd be here. He said. The detective looked at the strange, newer section of concrete. He said to check the walls. Lily looked at the wall she had been pushed against. She reached out and placed her palm flat on the cool, rough surface. A deep, cold shiver went through her. She didn't need to say anything. The truth was sealed inside, silent and waiting. The number in the wall was no longer a mystery. It was evidence, and David Thorne was finally caught in front of it. In the weeks that followed, the city was gripped by the story. David Thorne, the elegant, wealthy heir, was now a prisoner in a concrete cell of his own making. With the video confession, the evidence from the walls of his homes, and Lily's testimony, he had little choice. He confessed to everything. The murder of his wife, Elara. The disappearance of Maria, whose remains were found behind a wall in his old beach house. The attempt on Lily's life. He laid it all out in a cold, matter-of-fact way, as if discussing a failed business deal. Lily became Lily again in the eyes of the law and the press. Not Wave. She was the key witness, the survivor who brought down a killer. The police and prosecutors were gentle with her. They called her brave. They said she had helped deliver justice, but the words felt like stones in her stomach. Sitting in a small, quiet interview room at the police station, listening to a detective read back parts of David's confession, the full truth of her own past finally clicked into place. It wasn't just flashes or feelings anymore. It was a story, and she was in it. She had sought out David Thorne, knowing he was married to a rich, lonely woman. She had seen a shortcut to a life she'd always wanted. The glitter, the ease, the money. She had flirted. She had encouraged his complaints about Elara. She had listened to his cold plans and, instead of running to the police, she had seen her own opportunity. If Elara was gone, and David needed a new, devoted wife, why not her? She hadn't swung the bottle, but she had helped create the storm that led to it. She had been greedy. She had danced with a devil, thinking she could lead. When the detective slid a photograph of Elara Thorne across the table, a picture of a smiling woman in a garden, alive, Lily had to look away. Her throat closed up. Elara wasn't just a name in a confession or a body in a wall. She had been a person. And Lily's selfishness had helped paint a target on her back. Back at Alan's house, the peace was gone. The simple rhythm of sweeping floors and cooking soup was shattered. Now, when she looked at her hands, the hands that had drawn those endless cracks in the sand, she didn't see innocent confusion. She saw the hands of someone who had reached for something that wasn't hers, and in doing so, had helped break something irreparable. She stopped drawing in the sand. She stopped cooking. She would sit for hours on the edge of her bed, staring at the worn floorboards. Alan would bring her tea, but it would grow cold beside her. "They say you're not being charged," Alan said one evening, his voice low. He was mending a net by the window, giving her space. "You were a victim, too. He tried to kill you." Lily wrapped her arms around herself. "I wasn't a victim until I became a threat," she whispered. "Before that, I was an accomplice. I just didn't hold the weapon." The word accomplice tasted bitter. "You stopped him," Alan said firmly. "You fixed it." "I can't fix Elara," Lily said, her voice breaking. "I can't fix Maria. My fixing it doesn't bring them back. It just saves me." The guilt was a heavy, cold blanket she couldn't shake off. It wrapped around her in the night, tighter than any quilt. She would dream of the white wall on the yacht, but now the crack would split open and Alara's face would look out. Not angry, but sad and disappointed. She would dream of David smiling at her across a dinner table, a smile she had once thought was charming, but now saw as a predator sizing up his next move, and she had smiled right back. The village felt different too. People knew her story now from the news. They looked at her with a mix of pity and curiosity. She saw the way mothers sometimes pulled their children a little closer when she walked by. She was the woman from the scandal, the one who was almost a rich man's second victim, but also the one who had been with him before. She didn't belong in their simple world of honest work and clear right and wrong. Her past was too messy, too dark. One morning she packed the few things Alan had bought her, some clothes, a toothbrush, into a small bag. She didn't have much. She walked out into the main room where Alan was eating breakfast. He looked up, saw the bag, and his face fell. "Where are you going?" Lily couldn't meet his eyes. She looked at his hands, rough and good, hands that had only ever built and mended and saved. "I have to leave, Alan." "Why?" "It's over. You're safe here." "That's the problem," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I am safe. I get to walk away. I get to have a quiet life after everything." She finally looked at him, her eyes full of a deep, painful shame. "I don't deserve the peace of this place. I don't deserve your kindness, helped make a monster, and then I got to be the hero who stopped him. It's not right." Alan stood up, his chair scraping the floor. "Don't talk like that. You paid. You almost died." "It's not enough," she said, shaking her head. The weight of it was crushing her. She felt she was polluting the clean, salt air honesty of his home with the complicated dirt of her old life. "I need to go somewhere where the past isn't written on my face, where I I don't know, where the quiet doesn't feel like a reward I didn't earn." She shouldered the small bag. "Thank you, Alan, for everything, for being the only real thing in all those lies." Before he could argue, before his quiet, steadfast goodness could convince her to stay, she turned and walked out the door, leaving the little house by the docks behind. She didn't look back. She just started walking down the lane, away from the sea, carrying the heavy, invisible wall of her guilt with her, unsure if she would ever find a place to put it down. Lily walked for hours until her feet ached and the salt air of the village faded into the smell of diesel and dust from the bus station on the edge of town. She bought a ticket to nowhere in particular with the last of the small amount of money she had. She just knew she had to be gone. She was sitting on a cold plastic bench, waiting, when a shadow fell over her. She looked up. It was Alan. His truck was parked crookedly nearby, the door still open as if he'd jumped out in a hurry. His face was set in a determined frown. He didn't say anything at first. He just sat down heavily on the bench beside her, not touching her, and stared straight ahead at the grimy buses. "You forgot your sweater," he finally said, his voice rough. "The blue one. It's going to get cold where you're going, wherever that is." Lily looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. She didn't have an answer. Alan sighed, a deep, weary sound. "I'm not a smart man, Lily. I don't know big words, but I know the sea. And I know people make mistakes, bad ones, sometimes terrible ones." He turned to look at her, his eyes steady. "You're past it. What you did before, that was a crime. You walked into a dark room with your eyes open. Lily flinched, but he kept going. But what you did after? He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You used your clever mind to survive. When you could have run and hidden forever, you chose to turn around and face it. You chose to stand with what was right. That's not luck. That's a choice. That's making things right again. He struggled for the word. Redemption, he said, pronouncing it carefully, like a foreign fish he'd just learned the name of. You wrote a new ending to your own story. You don't have to keep reading the old bad chapters. Something in Lily's chest, a knot that had been pulled so tight it hurt, suddenly loosened. It wasn't gone, but the pressure eased. She had been holding her breath for so long, waiting for someone to condemn her, to confirm she was unworthy. Instead, Alan, who had every right to condemn her for bringing danger to his door, was offering her a different story. A single, hot tear spilled over and traced a path through the dust on her cheek. Then another. She didn't sob. She just sat there as the tears fell silently, a quiet release of the poison she'd been carrying. The wall of guilt was still there, but Alan's words were like a window cut into it, letting in light. After a long while, the tears stopped. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, leaving a clean streak. I don't know where to go, she whispered. Alan stood up. Yes, you do. He held out his big, calloused hand, not to pull her, but as an offer. You come home, and you sweep the floor, and you tell me my soup is too salty. You use those hands of yours to build something real, not to reach for shiny lies. She looked at his hand, then up at his honest, weathered face. Slowly, she reached out and took it. His grip was warm and solid, an anchor. She stayed. Life didn't go back to how it was. It moved forward. Lily didn't pretend to be Wave anymore. She was Lily, who had a past she regretted and a present she was determined to earn. She used her talent for order and her clever hands. She cleaned houses in the village for a fair wage. She organized Alan's fishing ledgers, which had been a mess of scraps of paper. She cooked meals that were simple, hearty, and always perfectly seasoned. And Alan, who had lived so long with just enough, found his life filled with a comfortable, quiet abundance. A clean home, a good meal waiting. Someone to share the silence with that wasn't lonely. 1 year later, on a clear morning with a sharp blue sky, they stood together in front of the little house by the docks. But it wasn't the same house. With the reward money from the Thorn case, which Lily had insisted on sharing, and with their own hard work, they had rebuilt it. The old, tired wood was gone. The leaky roof was a memory. In its place stood a new house, still modest, still facing the sea, but strong and bright. Its walls were made of warm, honey-colored wood, not cold concrete or crumbling plaster. Alan put an arm around Lily's shoulders. She leaned into him, her head resting against his solid arm. They didn't say anything. They just looked at their home. There were no hidden cracks in these walls, no terrible secrets sealed inside. The only sounds were the friendly creak of new timber settling, the cry of gulls, and the steady, gentle rhythm of the waves washing onto the shore, over and over, cleaning the sand. It was a peaceful sound, a sound of starting fresh. Lily took a deep breath of the clean, salty air, and finally felt like she belonged right where she was. The old, weathered shed that leaned against the side of Alan's, now their, new house, had been empty for years. It had stored rusted tools and broken nets. Lily looked at it one morning, her head tilted, a familiar, thoughtful look in her eyes. "It's wasted space," she said to Alan, who was scrubbing down his boat nearby. He grunted. "What do you want to do with it?" "We sell fish," she said simply. Alan paused, the brush in his hand dripping soapy water. "I sell fish to the wholesaler. We could sell it here, fresh, to the village, to people driving by on the coast road." Her mind was already working, her eyes scanning the shed's potential. "We clean it up, put in a counter, some ice bins, a simple sign." So they did. It wasn't a grand opening. There was no ribbon to cut. One sunny Thursday, Alan hung a hand-painted wooden sign by the road that read simply, "Fresh Catch." Lily, wearing a clean apron, arranged the first load of gleaming silver mackerel and fat pink shrimp on a bed of crushed ice inside the refurbished shed. The air smelled of salt and the clean, sharp scent of the sea, not dust and decay. The first customer was old Mrs. Gable from 2 lanes over, who bought 2 cod for her Friday dinner. Word spread. The Fresh Catch shed became more than a shop. It became a part of the village's rhythm. In the cool, dewy mornings, Alan would bring in the first catch of the day, his hands chilled from the sea. Lily would be waiting, her own hands quick and capable, sorting, cleaning, and laying the fish out like treasures. She kept a spotless ledger in her neat handwriting. She remembered people's preferences. Mr. Evans liked his salmon filleted. The Benson boys loved the whole small squid for frying. One afternoon, a fancy car from the city stopped. A woman in sunglasses got out, drawn by the simple sign and the smell of clean ocean air. She looked hesitant, out of place among the pickup trucks and worn boots. Lily smiled. Not the calculated smile she'd once used, but a genuine, easy one. "The sea bass just came in. It's perfect for grilling." The woman bought the bass. As Lily wrapped it in paper, the woman said, "It's so peaceful here." "It is," Lily agreed, and meant it. The woman never knew that the woman with the calm eyes and capable hands wrapping her fish had once been at the center of a scandal that filled the newspapers. To her, Lily was just the nice woman from the fish shed. That was the greatest gift the shed gave Lily. It gave her a new name, not defined by the past. She was the fish lady, Alan's wife, the one who makes that great fish stew. The labels were simple, honest, and built on the present. As months turned into a year, the rhythm of their life was set to the music of the sea and the shed. Up before dawn. Work with their hands. The satisfaction of a clean counter at the end of the day, the ledger adding up right. Simple food shared at their own kitchen table, often featuring that day's seconds, the perfectly good fish that just wasn't the prettiest for display. One evening, after they had closed the shed and washed down the counter with hose water, they sat on their small porch overlooking the water. The sky was painted in strokes of orange and purple. The waves whispered on the shore, a constant, gentle companion. Lily sat in a chair Alan had made from salvaged boatwood. She looked at their wooden house, at the tidy shed, at Alan's profile as he watched the gulls circle. A deep, quiet warmth filled her. a feeling so solid and real it was almost a physical thing in her chest. She had spent so long obsessed with walls. The cold, white wall of the yacht where a life ended. The cracked walls she drew in the sand, trying to understand the break inside herself. The terrible, final, concrete wall where David hid his sins. She had thought a home was a thing made of stone and money, something you took. But this, the smell of wood and sea, the ache of honest work in her muscles, the silent, steady presence of the man beside her, this was different. This hadn't been taken. It had been built, day by day, with clean hands and a clearer heart. Her true home had never been about walls at all. It wasn't a place you locked yourself inside. It was the warmth you found in the heart of someone who saw your cracks, and instead of hiding them away, helped you fill them with something strong and new. She reached over and took Alan's rough hand in hers. He didn't say anything. He just laced his fingers through hers and gave them a gentle squeeze, his eyes still on the horizon where the water met the sky. Outside, the waves kept whispering against the shore. A soft, endless sound of things being made clean again. And inside Lily, for the first time in a very long time, there was only peace.
So that's the end of the story. So what do you think about this story? I think the smartest, the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone else has written off as weak. They just have to be wait for the right moment to strike. So, if you like this story and wait for the next story, just hit the subscribe and like. Thanks for your listening.